Hi, everybody. My name is Braden, and today I will be concluding our talk on framework. So today we're going to be going over the shoulder, elbow, and then the hand and wrist. Go ahead and get started. So we'll go ahead and start with the shoulder. The shoulder is a pretty complex joint, similar to the hip. It's a ball and socket joint. So with that being said, it has a whole lot of movement potential in it. So we want to make sure that joint is properly mobilized. Some common dysfunctions that can arise in the shoulder are typically caused from, like I mentioned there, a lack of movement, some previous chronic injury, or possibly poor posture, or can be a combination of all three of these. With poor posture, we see how we previously discussed, it's like upper cross syndrome. So if my shoulders are internally rotated here at that scapular winging, that poor posture could cause some chronic injuries, some immobilization. So we just want to make sure that we're getting proper range of motion through that shoulder. When we're talking about myofascial release for the shoulder, it's great for the muscles of the shoulders and upper back. So it's great for our posterior deltoids, really any part of our delt, great for our upper and lower traps. Just make sure we're rolling over that joint specifically, but great for that surrounding musculature. Awesome. Then we talk about mobility, like I already touched on. Really want to make sure we're working through that full range of motion because that shoulder just has so much movement potential in it. And by working through that mobility, working through full range of motion, this can really help and aid in that injury prevention against those common injuries that we see in the shoulder. So common, we see tendonitis that's caused really from just repeated stress to the shoulder without proper mobilization, as well as like rotator cuff injuries. Kind of along the same lines. It's going to be that repeated action that's then leading to injury because we're not properly mobilizing that joint. So just making sure that we're placing some importance on that mobility in order to help aid in that joint health. Just like the previous two videos, we'll be going over all the exercises at the end. So we'll be going over those exercises once we get finished here. Next, we're going to talk about the elbow. The elbow can be important. It's going to hold less weight, kind of on the hierarchy of joint mobility, if we want to call it that. But still pretty similar. Common dysfunctions are going to arise from lack of movement and previous injury. So what's a common injury we see in the elbow is maybe like tennis elbow, some tendonitis, and that again is caused from that repeated actions without proper mobilization. So we're just making sure we're working through as much range of motion as the elbow has. When we talk about myofascial release along the same lines of the shoulder, can be good for surrounding musculature. Just want to make sure that we're staying off the elbow because it's just a really bony joint. It can be painful if we're putting direct pressure onto that elbow. Awesome. So talk about mobility with the elbow. The elbow is primary purpose is to stabilize. Mobility can be very helpful to aid in that elbow health. Typically, our elbow really only can flex and extend, but there's a little bit more range of motion in there as well. We'll be like internally and externally rotate our shoulder, which I'll be showing later. But just making it really very similar to other joints that we've covered. Just working through that full range of motion is going to help aid as much joint and ligament health as possible. Awesome. So now finally getting towards the hand and the wrist. So the hand and the wrist, very similar to the foot and ankle, very complex, has a lot of little joints and ligaments in there. So we want to make sure that we're mobilizing our hand and wrist. And dysfunctions, again, there's a theme here, arising from that lack of movement and arising from previous injury or a combination of the two. So we could also be lack of or just repeated stressful movements. So something we see common is like carpal tunnel, excuse me. Type a lot, that repeated movement without kind of getting any sort of alterations or more different ranges of motion in our movement patterns. So it's causing that chronic stress. Then we talk about myofascial release. It's very difficult for the hand and wrist. If we're talking about myofascial release, we could use very like small implements to do trigger point, but those are very like case to case basis. All right, so now good diving in further into that mobility. Again, very important working through that full range of motion. We have all those small little joints, small little ligaments in the hand and wrist. And like I previously discussed there, this could be very helpful in aiding carpal tunnel and inflammation, just working through those different ranges of motion, getting us outside of our normal movement patterns that we're doing with our hands. Because using our hands, using our wrists typically every day, most people are using that every day, but getting outside of those normal movement patterns, taking away some of that chronic stress that's occurring in our hand and wrist can be very helpful. And then I will get into these mobility exercises as well as exercises for the shoulder and the elbow right now. Awesome, cool. So first off, starting with the shoulder, our first exercise is going to be iron cross. How I'm going to do that, I'm going to have both my arms, elbows about shoulder height, about 90-degree angles with my arms. I'll bring my elbows in front of my face. Then I'm going to be pulling my hands along my head, pushing my elbows back and pulling down. So again, I'm bringing my elbows in, pull my hands over, push my elbows down, and pulling my elbows down, just like don't forget that little pulling motion there. So it's going to help out our shoulders, also help out our back a little bit. I also realized that I made a typo. These are called hair slicks. We're working iron cross. Iron cross. My arms going to be extended, and I'm rotating throughout my shoulders here. Bringing my right arm or left arm over my head, with the other arm coming underneath, trying to meet at the middle of my back while keeping upright posture. So the first exercise I showed were hair slicks, and then second one, iron cross. So both very helpful for the shoulder there. We just got a little additional exercise there with hair slicks. So next one we got our shoulder circles. These are pretty simple. I'm just making shoulder circles with my shoulders. So just trying to maximize that range of motion. I can go really big circles. I can go smaller circles. Just kind of mix it up, go from small to big, big to small. Just really just working through that range of motion in any way is going to be helpful. Last shoulder mobility exercise I got will be a sideline 90-90 stretch. So we're doing leg on my back, kick my right leg over my left. Both my hands will be extended out in front of me, and I'll take my top hand and I want to keep it pretty close to the floor, pretty close around my head. But bring it up around my head. And then I'm finishing with it extended out the opposite side of my body. And then I'll bring it back around. So going from here, slowly rotating around, keeping the hand on the ground if possible. Rotating through my shoulder and bringing it back around. So here is folks there, just make sure I'm anchoring my knee down, so I'm staying in that sideline position. My hand is staying tight to the ground to maximize that range of motion that I got. All right. Next, talk about the elbow. Elbow, kind of like I mentioned, is kind of some limited in its movement potential, but there are some ways that we can move through our elbow. One being elbow circles. So what I'll do here, my arms being extended, I will flex at my bicep, rotate my shoulder down, and then extend. So I'm just getting, so while I am moving my shoulder, I'm just getting some range of motion through my elbow joint as well. So they are interconnected in a way. So just moving both of those. So really doing this exercise is going to help in both our shoulder and elbow mobility. Next one again is also going to help both with our shoulder and elbow mobility. It's shoulder external and internal rotation. But we can see that as we're internally and externally rotating our shoulder, we're also putting some stress on that elbow joint. Stress in a good way here as we're going out and as we're internally rotating. That's it for the shoulder and elbow. Now getting into the hand and wrist. These are gonna be just like really small movements here. First one being spirit fingers. So what I'm doing here, just as simple as forcefully extending and forcefully flexing my fingers as much as possible. So extending, flexing as much as possible, just like that. Second movement I got are thumb pulls. So I can use my, say I'm pulling my right thumb, use my left hand. I can put pressure pulling towards my fingers. Put pressure going away from my fingers and then in towards my palm and away from my palm. So just resisting the action of my thumb, just working through those like different 4 different directions that my thumb can travel. Because the thumb is just a real important part of our hand. And because we got that big joint in our thumb, if we're not properly mobilized, again, following that cascading effect of not being properly mobilized, could lead to future injury, chronic pain. So we're just wanting to move it as much as possible. Next movement I got wrist flexion and extension. So very simple here. I'll start with my hand just straight out, palm could be down. I'm going into wrist flexion, wrist extension. So wrist flexion, either way we're holding it, wrist extension. Just working through that full range of motion. Next I got our wrist pronation and wrist supination. I could also just do a circle with my wrist and get that full range of motion, knocking out both flexion, extension, and pronation and supination all in one movement. So yeah, that's it. I hope all these different mobility presentations were helpful. So hope we're taking something away from it. We're just working through those different ranges of motion, trying to help out our joint health. But thanks everybody. See you next time.